Greetings, y'all. You know what I mean? I wanted to do this episode first, but I had to build up to it, right? I feel like this was one of the first articles I wrote, but it was like one of the sixth ones I've published, right? And it was because I wanted to talk about things in my life without it feeling shady, right? I wanted to be academic and I wanted to be as deep and an observational as it is when I'm looking at it. Oftentimes in my generation, when you think of something critically, people look at it as hate. But in my lived experience, I spend most time trying to constructively criticize things that I love a lot. I love Philadelphia. I love being a creative. And most importantly, I love Black people. So this is my audio podcast of the infrastructure gap beyond the hustle and the handout edition. This is my insight on Black business from personal experience and observation through the event venue perspective. If y'all have been here before, y'all know that I used to own an event venue. I've been a creative for going on about 10 years now. And the whole goal of this Newports and New Substack is to humanize myself, other creatives, and people who are of the culture and want to preserve it. I'm a cultural architect which means I come into your business. I make sure everybody's living right, feeling right, and doing right, while also ensuring that there's systems in place to ensure that there's sustainability in the business, but also in the human beings in it. Right now, I'm very, very AI. I love AI as a tool, just like the internet or electricity, but I do not think it is iRobot or the Terminator. I don't think this stuff is that advanced. I'll be the first to tell you, but it's a great tool, just like when they dropped Gmail. Okay, so with all that being said, um, this idea came to me because I work with a lot of Black-owned businesses, right? And I feel like a lot of them prioritize this America 250 tourism thing a lot more than the sustainability of their business, right? And shouts out to all of them because they provide an opportunity for me. So this was, like I said, an observation that I made because I care and I want to sustain my role and my position, but I also want to grow with them. But commercial stuff really grabs people attention, man. And Philadelphia is, in my opinion, turning into a place for tourism and not a place for Philadelphians, right? If you can live, if you make enough money, let's just be plain and simple here. That's why I do these audio versions, because when y'all read the articles, they're articulated well and they're concise and all of that. But I'll be honest, I like to talk how I like to talk. And I'm at a certain place in my life now where it's more important to get out the truth and let people decide where they're going to land with that. So, like I said, I love Black people. I aspire to have a business and live autonomously, employ people, share the truth, have a message, create a platform, do so many ambitious things. But I am not a Black capitalist. I am not a capitalist, first and foremost, but I'm certainly not a capitalist that disguises their business model and their monetization model around being Black. And there's a lot of people who do that today because they know Black people do have some disposable capital. They know that they do have some habits, and they know that they believe Black people over anybody else. So if I position myself as a Black person who wants to help you when really I just want your money, it's easier to get your money because I'm a Black person, right? This is what the root of Black capitalism is, right? And I don't believe making more money and owning more storefronts is going to save us as a people, right? Our liberation lies in being unified and a collective attack on the system as well, right? We all have to live. We all have to pay our bills and all that stuff. But with the money that we have in our community, it's not enough to have a Black dollar circulation that saves all of us. There's over 40 million of us. And, aggregately, from the research that I've done in articles that I will be publishing, nearly maybe 20 million of us are actively working full time. On average, the average Black person is taking care of 1.3 Black people outside of themselves. So including your own living stability, there's an additional almost 1.5 other people you're taking care of. So this idea of we're all going to get rich practicing capitalism is a myth. It's not mathematically possible. And unless we were to start actually getting money from other communities, right, that's where I guess wealth and capitalism could be exacted. If you're talking to these people who practice capitalism, the money would have to come from other groups of people for us to be successful capitalists, right? Us getting money from one another will only keep a few of us rich, as it has already done, right? And a lot of that richness turns into classism, and a lot of that classism then becomes our own black people being goalies, right? They're guarding the rich class because that proximity to whiteness allows them to have proximity to power and systems and visibility and stuff like that. So whether it's white corporate greed or black street hustling, or the desire to get the most profit for the least effort is just not a good look. It's corrosive to the people. It is a bottom line kind of attitude where eventually humanity of people gets erased, right? So let me tell you a little bit about myself and some of my perspective in all of this, right? Because by the time I was 13, I was buying weed, selling weed, et cetera, and some other activities that go along with that we don't want to get into today, right? Just because like I'm learning that that's not the most important part of my journey, but it's important about my journey, right? So my mindset back then, when you're a hustler, and what I often see in the black community is, if I give you $1,000 right now, right, how much money do you want to make from it? I'll let you sit with that, okay? Because oftentimes when you're dealing with like the Waltons, right, those are the owners and the creators of Walmart. I was studying their business model, a while ago, probably over 10 years ago now, and I learned that when they created that business model, they were just trying to make 30% on each dollar, right? Because of the way other businesses and their competitors were set up and blah, 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 right? But the point was they were trying to make 30% on their dollar. If you look at the stock market, the S&P 500 guarantees you maybe 8 to 10% return annually. So the idea that most black people get $1,000, they're like, all right, by next month, I'm trying to make $2,000, right? You're trying to make what we call a flip. And a flip is not a sustainable business model, right? Um, and a lot of what goes into the ethics of most business doesn't prioritize other people's birthdays in a sentimental way, right? People will use your birthday to sell you something. They see your birthday as an opportunity where your buying habits are heightened, not because they care about your birthday. They don't care about what extra bills you got coming in. Capitalists don't care about repeatable, disposable income. So just because you got your taxes is a great time to uh, target you as a consumer, right? So these are things that I noticed from being in the drug game, where it's like no one cares about you as a person; they just want your money. And then I started seeing a lot of that same ethics being poured into legitimate businesses, right? Most people who own businesses actually say it's because they want to get out of working. That's what they believe. They believe owning a business is going to relieve them from work because they'll be able to hire other people to do everything. And anytime I hear, multiple 6-figure, 7-figure non-black people talk on the internet, especially on YouTube, about having a business, the first thing that they think about is how to outsource all the labor, right? They're like, it's not a real business if you're working inside of it, right? And I feel like I have a lot of feelings around that. I'm not going to go into my feelings around that, but I think that that's a form of propaganda, to say the most, right? And that's just because the irony of calling something a business and not validating it unless you're not working in it sounds very familiar, especially being in America and hearing it from people who typically, employ people at the lowest rate possible to make the highest profit possible. But we're not going to get into that too much, right? Because the premise of this entire article is what I mentioned in the beginning, right? Is in Philadelphia and all across the United States, right? Everybody's celebrating 250 in America, right? So if you don't understand the context of this, it has been 250 years since the Constitution has been written. The Constitution was written because pretty much America wanted to distinguish themselves as a nation from Great Britain. And there's so much history that goes into that, as far as America not paying their taxes, and the Civil War starting shortly after, and et cetera, right? So there hasn't been a lot of solidarity here in America, even amongst, you know, colonizers and white people, right? In the middle of this, you have black people, right, as slaves up until Juneteenth, apparently, based on, you know, accepted mainstream media and history. Once again, not why I'm here. The reason I'm here is present day 2026, right, where they're celebrating the 250-year anniversary. And guess how Philadelphia is commemorating that, right? With a FIFA World Cup game. Now, I found it ironic, a bit funny, to say the least, that this is the most commercial thing ever, right? To celebrate 250 in America around a soccer game, and soccer isn't even in, you know, a part of the American history. It's literally like a commercial tourism cash grab, right? Let's celebrate the FIFA World Cup along with the 250th anniversary, because why? Both of these spectacles bring in a lot of tourism and a lot of money. I don't think Philadelphia is expecting a large uptick in Philadelphians' expenditures, right? They're marketing this to the world. They're thinking about all of the people who are going to be flying in from multiple different states and countries to celebrate the FIFA World Cup, as well as learn a little bit about America while they're here during the 250th anniversary. So there's going to be a bunch of activations and shows and concerts and festivals and stuff. Um, and I find that very interesting, right? Because speaking of Juneteenth, on June 19th, Haiti versus Brazil will be playing in the World Cup, right? And on that same day, Wawa Welcome to America Festival begins, a 16-day run. This is where I feel like the height of extraction will be, right? I believe on 4th of July, Mayor Sherelle Parker announced that she'll be throwing her own festival as well. Mind you, we have several schools closing in Philadelphia, public schools that impact majority black students. We have hunger strikes going on, right? We have unemployment rates at their highest, a literacy crisis, and most people are just worried about what 250 in America can bring them as far as an injection of money, right? I don't even want to call it capital, because I've learned that people use this word capital and money interchangeably, and money does not equate to capital, especially when the infrastructure that you have doesn't hold the money, that it all pours back into other people's infrastructure. So if you have a business and you don't own the building and you make money, it's essentially not really capital, because you are operating in a building you don't own. So it's really just rent. It's actually just expenses. It's just revenue at the very most, if we're calling it what it is, right? It's revenue. It hasn't even exacted itself and matured itself into profits yet, until you know, clearly price your product to outpace the amount of money you pay per month, and then still got to pay your employees and etc. And I don't know very many black businesses that do that. If you look up statistically, I believe less than, or let's reverse the way we're framing this. Nearly 96% of black businesses don't have any employees. Right? It's very, very unlikely that a black business has employees that they hire, and have several of them at that. Right? The majority of black businesses are solopreneurships. Um, Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, right, is there's just a brutal truth that comes with this, right? Most of us as black people are not ready for this, right? Most black people are not business owners. They're not making $80,000 to $100,000 a year. They're not fiscally secure, right? They don't have money saved up, so they will not be enjoying the FIFA World Cup. They won't be enjoying 250 Black in America, as some people are spokesmaning it, right? Because some people obviously are going to take this opportunity to be a black capitalist, right? And create an experience where they're trying to attract tourism and commercialism through the black experience. But I mean, who has the least leverage here, right? Do you think America wants to be reminded about how bad they were to black people while they're trying to promote that America is a good place for the world to immigrate to? I don't see how being black in America is something that people would aspire to or enjoy learning about, especially when the majority of that experience is dealt in hardship. So, what is it? Our jobs as Black business people who are looking for sponsorships, grants, and corporate funding, it's our job to sanitize it, right? And I'm being facetious here. I'm being sarcastic. But that's literally what the job is. If you're a Black owned business, the only way that you really fit into all of this is if you can sanitize what Black culture looks like. We don't want to be radical. We don't want to be truth tellers. We don't want to be whistleblowers. We don't want to be protesters. And we don't want to be, confronting the system at this time, right? We want to get in line, have our 250 on our merchandise and our 250 products and our 250 events so that everybody feels safe to come spend some money with us. But the reason why I wrote this is because there's a survival trap that many Black businesses are only looking at the next month's rent often, right? They're only thinking about the next few months at most, maybe a year at the farthest. They aren't looking at the next 2 to 3 years, right? They think if they throw a quick after party, quick pop up, quick exhibition to capitalize on this momentum, but they won't have the data. They won't have the communities of people who are coming here aggregately, right? They're not going to be retaining the interest of the majority of the tourism or the notoriety for any of these things, right? They don't have the continuity that the city has and the major corporations have spent years building as conglomerates, as partners, right? I call this infrastructure, for lack of a better word, right? When this wave hits Black businesses, I wrote this metaphorically, right? I'm saying it's a bullet to the kneecap. What does that mean? I've watched a lot of mob movies. So when they don't want to kill you, they shoot you in the kneecap to send you a warning. And I feel like this is the time where Philadelphia is sending the Black Philadelphian a warning, right? If you already can't maintain the cost of living here, over the next 5 to 8 years, I'm sure it will go up tremendously, right? I'm sure it is, because over the last 5 to 6 years since the pandemic, it has rose dramatically. And I'm sure it's going to continue to do that. When this wave hits Black businesses, if they don't have the infrastructure, which most of them don't, right, which is becoming mainstream Philly culture, that's where we're going with this. People will not be spending their limited time and money on a disorganized last minute offer, right? They're going to go where everything is happening, right? The FIFA World Cup. They're going to go to the Wawa Fests. They're going to go to the hundreds of events that are offered this year by Philadelphia and organized by the city, right? There's so many things, free museums, farmers markets, bazaars, street festivals, all the things that Black people brought to this community, to this city, right? All of the festivities, the vendors, the barbecuing, the line dancing, the dreams and nightmares from Meek Mills, right? All the cultural cachet that has been whitewashed, I would say. I've heard this, right? There's a Black Philly movement where even the word John is being used by the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Which was derived from Black people. So a lot of the cultural IP, right? A lot of the business models as far as creativity and community, and a lot of just the essence and the spirit and the heart of what Black people have poured into this city has been, what we call gentrified. People say it all the time, but the Black businesses are the ones that I wanted to highlight in this, is because they are the gatekeepers between the politicians and the people, right? The people come to the businesses, and then the politicians come to the businesses because they want to get access to the people, and the people give their money to the businesses. So what is the role of the businesses in our community, really, right? If they're not morally sound to the values of the people, because if they're in alignment with the politicians because they can get some extra cash, then they're loyal to the cash. And if the politician is just the broker between the business and the corporation, well, this is how we have fascism, right? Because when your politicians and your corporations are working together and their effort is to only approach a Black business when they can reach the constituency of their audience and their consumers, well, now we're just in a pipeline towards corporate interests, right? The people buy from the business gives that interest over to the politician, and the politician is bought out by the corporation. So we don't really get any structural change, and we're always lending our interests, our efforts, and our attention to really what corporations would like, right? And multiple people are on the front end of framing things like they're for the people when they're really just for the corporation. It's a what I call a switcheroo, right? Sleight of hand, if you will. So this creates what part of my article I talk about is how this creates a cannibalistic environment, right? And I've been guilty to this to a degree. Like anytime I say this, I'm not saying this entirely, but I've seen patterns in myself, right? I tried to outpace bad partnerships with hard work, right? Let me say that again because that's 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 the symptom of capitalism, right? It tells you that you're the problem and that you're not working hard enough and that you're not doing right. And it removes you from spending a lot of time looking at the structural systemic barriers, which is way more powerful than black capitalism or black dollars, right? Having a black dollar circulate. When billions of dollars go to the military and policing, and trillionaires and billionaires are not paying taxes, right? And the money that goes from our taxes from a day-to-day level, from a day-to-day person, ultimately goes right back into the hands of politicians who don't advocate for policies that help us, right? That's way more money than the money that we circulate as a black dollar. That's not like the black dollar circulates, I believe, around $1 trillion annually, maybe more, but trillions of dollars are funneled through the government daily, right? And in policy and for, buyouts and all types of things, right? We send money all over the place in sets of billions. So that's where I'm saying, like, I'm not ever going to say that practicing black group economics isn't important. That's actually more important, I believe, to your self-esteem, your ethics, your values, your emotions, your mental. That helps reinforce those things. But if we're just talking about money, right, you can see where the money is at. The money in the government, right? The money is in the corporations. And we should be attacking them as far as getting them to give us the money that we spend all our time going to work and producing, and all of our money after going to work consuming with, right? The consumer has a lot of leverage here because without the consumer, a lot of these government entities have no one to serve, and a lot of these corporations have no one to sell to. So redistributing wealth from the top to the people who create the top, literally from their consumption and their work, is where a lot of the money or the activism that people talk about when they're saying black dollar circulation and black capitalism, right? But they don't want to really deal with those people, right? Jay-Z doesn't want to go against Elon Musk. You feel me? Diddy doesn't want to go against Mark Zuckerberg, right? They want to tell you that buying from them is your best advantage, right? They don't want to go against the people who actually create multi-billion-dollar structures and keep them out of the room, right? Just so that later you can be sold this abusive relationship with capitalism that says you should work harder, right? You just have the wrong partnerships because you're not partnering with people outside of your community. And I'll add this part before I move on. What I'm hearing, a lot of people who willfully practice capitalism or unwillfully practice it, their same sentiment always seems to be, well, there's no other options. We don't have any other options, which is farthest from the truth, but it also shows that they've given up on trying to fight back. So just be mindful of when you hear people say that, and think about the totality of the conversation. Just zoom out and think about why people are advocating that there's no choice when there's clearly always been a choice. Capitalism is not what has always been. So what were people doing prior? And I think a lot of times people have ambitions and fantasies of being rich. So if that means they have to allow a lot of people to lose for them to even have the opportunity to win, that's why a lot of people will defend capitalism, is because they have dreams of being rich. And I don't judge anybody for that, but I will make it very plainly stated, right? I'll make that known, and I'll be someone who has a voice around those subjects, right? I'm not turning down no coins, but I'm also not putting coins in front of my morals or my values, right? So to end that point with the cannibalistic environment part, right? I saw abusive relationships firsthand, right? And that's why I sound so passionately about this, because there's damage that's done on a regular basis that a lot of people turn a blind eye to, right? Giving some, you could give someone their first opportunity only to watch them take that momentum to another venue because they could get that deal cheaper, right? And I'm speaking on venues because that's my expertise. I had a venue. I help other venues and black businesses that operate as venues and, gathering spaces and stuff, right? So this cycle of taking advantage of one another is disguised as business, but really we practice caring more about money than humanity in our circle, and we give over and over and over again to non-black spaces so that they can return us crumbs of the larger infrastructure that they have while our infrastructure starves. So I wrote something called the Philadelphia life cycle, right? When a corporation sees a black led movement succeed, they don't collaborate with it, they just replace it. They inject capital into a similar lurking thing, right? They build big TV screens and create the amenities that we were trying to work our way up to, right? Going back to that whole, if we worked harder, things would be better ideal, versus telling them to give us the money for the thing that they're going to try to replace us for later, right? Creating policies where they can't just replace our ideas, right? They should be helping us create whatever copyrights, trademarks, and etc. that don't allow them to be able to pretty much sabotage us later on. Because we try to scale our own people, we try to scale our own people for profit rather than building a communal defense, right? And then the original event dies. The city builds up the same name, and then now, if your market or the people you served aren't completely cut in half, they're taken entirely. And then within a few extra years, that original black led idea is gone, right? So let's just go through that real quickly, right? You create the idea, the city sees the idea, they replace the idea with glitz and glamour, TVs, and celebrities and things like that. Then the same thing that you were doing for profit that you should have been doing for communal defense begins to die, and then eventually it fizzles out, right? So I'm going to end this talk today with what I hate about all of these articles that I have to write is, a lot of people want solutions, right? And I'm not very much into like being this whole I've got the solutions kind of person, but I don't like leaving people at the climax or the height of what is important about the conversation, because everybody doesn't alchemize or like handle that the same way. Bye, baby. I love you too. Everybody doesn't handle that climactic energy the same. Okay, so I try to be my best about being as digestible as possible. Okay. So let's go over some solutions, right? Shouts out to my lady too. Y'all see it. I keep it real. I ain't gonna even hold you. So we want to survive this portal. We have to change the metrics that are even important to us, right? We shouldn't be concerned more with profit margins than we are with the humanity of the people around us, right? So let's stop this race to the bottom, right? If your prices are just an attempt to protect you from bad partnerships or bad leases or agreements that you've made with with your landlord or your bank, then we in the wrong. You're already in the wrong business, right? Let's start learning how to build ecosystems, right? Let's stop shaming artists and entrepreneurs what they don't know, and let's build spaces where they can get paid to grow. A lot of what I see in these creative spaces is the venue owners or the business owners shaming the artists because they are not capitalists. They are not eager to learn business. Okay. So the last thing I'll say is prioritizing community. All right. That's it. Like if you prioritize, if you don't have repeatable, predictable outcomes, you are not a brand. You are an inconvenience, right? So doing some 250 in America stuff was on nobody's radar until it was on somebody's radar, right? And it wasn't the black community. So I closed my space, right? Just as we talk about spaces, I closed my space because I saw myself becoming a landlord and not an architect of culture, which I am today. I didn't know that's what I wanted to be then, but hey, you know, that's what hindsight does. And that's what being honest with yourself does. It allows you to change. So I'm documenting this now so that I can be the first person to talk about this blowback that's coming, because it's not a popular topic. But for anybody who's here listening, you were the first to get this perspective. I'm sure. I know nobody's talking about this. And maybe, maybe somebody knows better than me. You know what I'm saying? Save yourself. Go for the quick flip. Continue to practice capitalism. Be my guest, right? But true fascism, the real fascism, the stuff you read about in books, is landing on the arts and entertainment space as I'm speaking. And if we don't start organizing infrastructure that is ethical and repeatable and human centric, right? Worrying more about people, we will look back and realize that we had the tools, but we didn't do what we were supposed to do with them, right? We had the AI, we had the social media, we had access to this and that, right? So let's stop selling each other's soul and selling each other's integrity just to cover each other's rent, or cover our own rent, not even each other's. We trying to cover our own rent and don't care about anybody else's rent. Let's start building something that's sustainable for all of us. All right. I'll see y'all in a few more weeks. I mean, this is the Still Growing podcast session. Please subscribe to our Substack. We lost a subscriber last week. I don't know why. I don't know what I did. If you hear this, let a brother know something, man. What's going on? How can I better serve you? So we're on our road to 10 subscribers. I hope you are our next one. Thank you.